So in this video we're going to be talking about the living force and the living force web that is essentially the tapestry that makes up all life in the galaxy. If you remember Ben Kenobi's words in A New Hope, the force surrounds us, penetrates us, binds us together.
The force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
Then what Yoda says in Empire Strikes Back, life creates it, makes it grow.
Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. You must feel the force around you.
So the living force is the fire of life. And Tarkin's line from A New Hope is also relevant here when he talks about Jedi fire. He says the fire has gone out of the galaxy. That the force has gone out of the galaxy.
Don't underestimate the force.
The Jedi are extinct. Their fire has gone out of the universe.
And essentially, if you relate the force to light, which is what it is, the Jedi are bright stars in the force, and their light shines far and wide. And that light, wherever their light shines, is whatever they're connected to.
Had seen the truth of the dark. Maybe that's why they never talked about a light side. Because there wasn't one. But, Luke thought, gazing upon the brilliant blaze that was his sister, just because there's no light side doesn't mean there's no light. He had thought he was bringing light with him into the darkness, by holding on to the Force. Now he saw that the Force's light didn't shine on him. It shone through him. He was the light in the darkness. He saw it now, and it made sense to him at last. That same light shone through Leia, and as soon as he understood that, he began to sense other lights, pinprick stars far out in the dark. Some of them he recognized, Han, and Lando, Wedge and Tygo, Hobby and Wes and the rest of the rogues, Nick, and Iona Cantor, Lieutenant Tubrimi and Captain Tyrosk and so many others, sailors and marines, even the impossibly distant spray of vanishingly faint stars that must have been the stormtroopers, for even there were lights in the darkness. All of them were stars. And every star, every life, was a thing of beauty.
And that's what's referred to as the Jedi fire. So for a bit of context, just remember that emotions are energies in Star Wars. Positive emotions are light side energies, negative emotions are dark side energies. And those connections are bonds, right? They're bonds of emotions. The Jedi are selfless, they think outwardly, only about others. It's the opposite of the Sith who think inward and only about themselves. If you remember my video about the master and apprentice relationship of the Rule of Two Sith, their bonds are internal. They're bonded through their internal selfish desires, whereas the Jedi are the opposite of that. They're selfless and they're bonded to all different things, and it's through outwards positive emotions. It's selfless, it's about everybody else.
The Sith rely on their passion for their strength. They think inwards, only about themselves.
And the Jedi don't.
The Jedi are selfless. They only care about others.
Being compassionate, being kind, that forms bonds that connects you to other people. And the more light side, the more connections, the stronger the living force is. The more tightly knit and connected it is. And that's the goal of the Jedi, right? It's to just keep everyone positive, essentially. Keep all these positive emotions flowing. Keep everyone happy and keep the Force pure of dark side emotions. That's the point of the Jedi. And because they're naturally strong Force users, they're naturally sensitive to this energy. So it's their moral obligation to stay balanced. Because being part of that web of energy, being sensitive to more of it, being sensitive to more of the energy that binds all living things together, being more sensitive to that means that you have more power over that. So each Jedi is a bright star. It's a point in the tapestry that binds a lot of the web together. So the more powerful you are, the more threads of energy cross at the point in that web of energy that is you. That's all somebody is. It's a crossing of all these energies. It's a culmination of different energies that make up a person. Every different person is just an aspect of the Force made physical.
The Force, made physical, a Jedi is. Comes great responsibility with that, yes?
But the energy doesn't belong solely to any one person, right? It crosses between everyone else. So the actions of a very powerful Force user, for instance, that has a lot of threads crossing its Force presence, that connects a lot of the tapestry. If he goes to the dark side, those threads are going to break, and he is no longer going to connect. He's no longer going to be a point in the Force that connects and binds. So the Force is going to be weaker as a whole. The living Force is not going to be as held together, as strong. And that's because there's an imbalance. That's the web of life that the Jedi strive to maintain and keep strong through the inspiration of positive emotions. So the power of each individual in the web of energy is represented by the number of threads intersecting at their point. And it's only the power that you bring out and through yourself and bring it to around you, through inspiring those positive emotions and through acting on that without confliction and with quiet of mind, that you start to connect more threads in that web of power, in that tapestry. Because that's how you surrender to the flow and don't restrict your light shining with any mental clouding.
Remembered what it was to be a Jedi. He leaned back in his chair and covered his face with both hands, inhaling a thin stream of air between his palms. Into himself with the air, he brought pain and guilt and remorse, and as he exhaled, they trailed away and vanished in the air. He breathed out his whole life. Everything he had done, everything he had been, friends and enemies, dreams and hopes and fears. Empty, he found clarity. Scrubbed clean, the Force shone through him. He sat up and nodded to Yoda.
Being the inspiration and cause of those emotions and spreading them around you. This is how the Jedi create light side power. They talk about this in the Revenge of the Sith novelization. And that's just what letting the power out into the web is.
There have been hundreds of thousands of Jedi. Hundreds of thousands of Jedi feeding the light with each work of their hands, with each breath, with every beat of their hearts, bringing justice, building civil society, radiating peace, acting out of selfless love for all living things. And in all those 1,000 years, there have been only 2 Sith at any time. Only 2. Jedi create light, but the Sith do not create darkness. They merely use the darkness that is always there, that has always been there. Greed and jealousy, aggression and lust and fear. Are you saying, to follow your metaphor, that the Jedi have cast too much light? From what I have seen these past years, the galaxy has not become all that bright a place.
And the amount of power that you pull through into that web is determined on your Force potential, so the amount of midichlorians that you have determines the amount of power you're able to pull through. Because the Cosmic Force is the source, and the Cosmic Force exists within us. The Living Force does too, but primarily it's the Force around us. Penetrates us and binds us, and the Cosmic Force binds us as well, don't get me wrong, but that's a topic for another video. We're focusing on the Living Force here. So it needs to be pulled from within us and spun into the web. Now the mechanism for that is midichlorians, and I'll get more into that in a video dedicated entirely to midichlorians. So whatever Jedi pull through into their living Force and into the web, that is the Jedi fire, and that is the light that, stretches from us and to us and connects to everything. The Heart of the Jedi novel gives us some really nice commentary on this.
It is strong with the Force. The threads of energy which interweave to bind all life together have many crossings there. It is a collection point. Its concentrated power form a sort of gateway into the pure essence of all being. It was a great work of uncountable fine threads, running here and there to various points, connecting, linking, crossing, intertwining in a complex woven fabric that seemed to bind all into a whole tapestry. And many threads shot away from it into the surrounding space, as if stretching out to touch other worlds. It's the lines of energy, said Luke. I can see them.
So remember what Tarkin said, the Jedi fire has gone out of the universe. That's because with each Jedi death, that fire goes out. So each Jedi death actually sucks some of the Force back out from the living Force, back into the Cosmic Force. It actually sucks the Force out of the galaxy with each Jedi death. The Force actually gets weaker and actually dies with each Jedi death. And Obi-Wan actually makes note of this in The Last One Standing, Says he hasn't realised that he once felt a humming presence alive with the force ability of his fellow Jedi. It had fed him, and he hadn't even known it. Because the Jedi fire has gone out, the living force is dead. There's hardly any energy in the galaxy to draw off, to even use, and the Jedi, of course, feed on the living force. They draw power from the living force.
How can you eat that?
But Master, you're the one who always taught me to feed off the living force.
That's not what I...
They also talk about this in Dark Lord, Rise of Darth Vader by James Luceno, about how he thought it was a personal failure, but in fact it was just the Force was dead.
He had thought of his diminished abilities as a personal failure, when, in fact, it was the Force as the Jedi had known it that had been defeated. The flame extinguished.
Typically when it says the Force, it's referring to the living Force, and not all the time. Sometimes it's quite ambiguous and you have to sort of figure out what aspect of the Force typically refers to, because it's not always made clear. But typically it is the living Force, and that's what gets pulled out of the galaxy with each Jedi death. It's the Jedi fire that's being put out. So the available energy in the galaxy actually weakens. There's less available energy in the galaxy to use, the lesser Jedi that there are in the galaxy, or the lesser power that there is in that web. It just means there's less energy in the galaxy to use. So the more Jedi in the galaxy, the more powerful the Jedi can be, because there's more energy. But that is also dependent on how strong those Jedi are as well, because it's all about how much force power is pulled through into that web, is woven into that web. Labyrinth of Evil talks about how the Jedi fire has been dying out for a while with war and the corruption of the dark side in the universe.
Given that elegance, gallantry, and enchantment were gone from the galaxy, it was only fitting that the Order's days were numbered, that the fire that had been the Jedi was guttering and dying out, as with the corrupt Republic itself.
And yet there's just this big narrative set up that when the Jedi return, the Force returns too. And when the Jedi die, the Force dies. All those Jedi deaths are sucking the energy out of the galaxy, they're sucking the energy out of that web of power. And Lucas actually talks about this in the draft for A New Hope, when he talks about, with every Jedi death, contact with the Ashla, aka light side of the Force, grows weaker. They say the light side is weak, and the given reason for that is because all the Jedi are dead. And so what that tells us is that the Jedi make up the light side of the Force in the universe.
While one Jedi lives, survive the Order does. Resist the darkness. With every breath, we must.
He lifted his head, and the stick angled to poke Obi-Wan in the shin.
Especially the darkness in ourselves, young one.
So when there's no Jedi in the galaxy, there's no power in the galaxy.
Years back, he would have been able to manage it alone. But no longer. He wasn't sure if the weakness was in him or if, with the death of every Jedi, the war was leeching some of the Force out of the universe.
So every Jedi death weakens the web of power. And it is literally like a web, picture a web with a bunch of spiders on it. The spiders are the Jedi, they're spinning the web, weaving the web with emotions, and then that web then is their fortress, that's their power, that's the Force. And the life web of Dathomir is a metaphor for this. Talk about that in Book of Sith. Talzin talks about how living creatures create a life web. It's a different belief, of course, that all stems from Dathomir, but it's the same thing they're talking about there. It's just the living Force. The Night Sisters just view it differently, and I'll get into that in a future video. Talzin says that everyone is part of this web, and that anyone can tap into the power of the spirits to fan the fires of your bestial nature, and share the abilities of the beasts. And of course the spirits live in the cosmic force, so what she's saying there is essentially just what I was saying before about how you have to pull it from within you and bring it out and spin it into that web, and that's fanning the fires of the bestial nature. And then this shares the abilities, which is the same thing we see happen with the Jedi. Gambit Siege talks about this.
The war had swallowed his colleagues completely. At no other time in his memory had the Council been this scattered, its cohesiveness this endangered. It wasn't simply a question of companionship. In weighty matters, the Council functioned best when its members shared the same space, the same moment. when the Force could weave its way effortlessly among them and their separate strengths and talents combined to become something greater and more powerful than each of them alone.
When made apparent, things like thoughts and intention can be read or transmuted into the living Force web, and that extends to knowledge and abilities as well. All of those talents and abilities are brought out into the living Force and they merge together in the Jedi fire. It's not just a web of emotions and bonds, but also a web of information. So all the Jedi's collective abilities and talents, they all merge together within the Force web, making the Force, and therefore the Jedi, stronger as a whole. And this is intensified by proximity as well, of course, when their auras overlap, which is why they all sit in a circle in the council chamber. And so knowledge exists in the Force, data, information, emotions, everything exists in the Force and is transmuted through this living Force web. Dooku actually corrupts a large portion of this web with fear, making it a dark side sort of web that the Sith can feed off of, which is what Mace Windu spectates through Shatterpoint.
I could have done it, because I knew. I could feel it. In the swirl of the Force around me, I could feel the connections Dooku had forged between Jango and the Trade Federation, the Geonosians, the whole separatist movement. Connections of greed and fear, of deception and bold intimidation. Dooku was the Shatterpoint. I knew it. That is my gift. Imagine a Coruscant gem, a mineral whose interlocking crystalline structure makes it harder than Durasteel. You can strike one with a 5-kilo hammer and do no more than dent the hammer's face. Yet, that same crystalline structure which gives the Coruscant strength also gives it shatter points. Spots where a precise application of carefully measured force, no more than a gentle tap, will break it into pieces. I can see shatter points. The sense is not sight, but see is the closest word Basic has for it. It is a perception, a feel of how what I look upon fits into the Force and how the Force binds it to itself and to everything else. Put simply, when I look at you through the Force, I can see where you break. Situations have shatter points, like gems, but those of situations are fluid, ephemeral, appearing for a bare instant, vanishing again to leave no trace of their existence. They are always a function of timing. There is no such thing as a second chance.
So essentially the Shatterpoint ability is just a way to look into the living Force web, to see those connections and to see where all those threads cross, to see what it is you need to target to break those connections, to break those threads. Dooku is the Shatterpoint because he's the one who connects all those threads.
He could feel it. In the Force, stress lines spidered out from the wafer like frost scaling supercooled transparasteel. He could not read the pattern, but he could feel its power. Though he felt no malice from them, he'd felt none from Gepton either. But he did feel, knotted around them, a strangling web of anger and fear and pain.
So the living Force doesn't have anything to do with the future or the past, right? The living Force is the present, it's the power now, it's life now. And it's a metaphor for basically, like, stop paying attention to everything going on in your head, pay attention to what's around you, what's going on around you. That's the living Force, and you see this through Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon sort of represents the true path of the Jedi, what a Jedi should be, following the living Force instead of getting too caught up in the cosmic Force in the future or the past, and live for the present.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I don't sense anything.
It's not about the mission, Master. It's something elsewhere. Elusive.
Don't center on your anxieties, Obi-Wan. Keep your concentration here and now where it belongs.
But Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future.
But not at the expense of the moment. Be mindful of the living Force, young Padawan.
Yes, Master.
And this is where the Jedi thinking, like, outwardly out of love for all things, out of compassion and love and light side emotions comes into play. Because it's all inherently to do with the present, right? To do with what's going on around you, to do with all things. And not just other people, but nature as well, the environment, which includes a love for the circle of life and the way things are. And an acceptance that, yeah, one day you're gonna die and you need to accept that and live for the moment. Live in the present, which is the living force. Which is also the light side, which is also the Jedi fire. So it's all intertwined, right? It's all the same thing. And so it's all just about being a good person, basically. And so it's those light side emotions for everything around you. So for example, compassion. Compassion is about understanding and empathising with others in the current state. It's being present and attentive in the moment, which is exactly what living force is. Or joy, for example. Joy is experienced in the present. It's a state of being that arises from being fully engaged with life. And the present, it's got nothing to do with the future or like living in your mind. It's something that you experience externally, being joyful in life. So it's all about a love for all things, including pathetic life forms, and Qui-Gon demonstrates this once again when he saves Jar Jar.
You saved my again!
What's this? Why do I sense we've picked up another pathetic life form?
And the way you follow the living force is by following your instincts, right? And instincts inherently come from information that's already in the web of life. That's where instincts come from. It's essentially some predetermined knowledge of the environment and what to do in the moment. It's instincts. And the information comes from that web. That's where all that information, that data flows. So Shatterpoint just allows the user to look into this force web. Look into this web of power in detail and actually see the connections and see the threads of power. And that's all present based as well. When Mace looks into Shatterpoint, he can perceive weaknesses and strengths and stress points that exist in the present. It's not foresight, it's just perceiving these points in the present. He can look into Shatterpoint and see dynamics and relationships between people. You can see information. You can see where some decisions may lead down one path, where another decision may lead down another. Not necessarily, again, it's not foresight, it's just where one path could branch off down a different path due to a decision in the present. Kreia shines a bit of light on this in Knights of the Old Republic 2 when she talks about the light side and dark side options and how they can potentially lead into a sort of butterfly effect and lead down different paths, etc.
Thank you, stranger. I won't forget your kindness.
Why did you do such a thing? Such kindnesses will mean nothing. His path is set. Giving him what he has not earned is like pouring sand into his hands. What if by surviving another day he brings a greater darkness upon another? The slightest push, the smallest touch, sends echoes throughout life. Even an act of kindness may have more severe repercussions than you know or can see. By giving him something he has not earned, perhaps all you have helped him become is a target. Seeing another elevated often brings the eyes of others who suffer. And perhaps in the end, all you have wrought is more pain. And that is my lesson to you. Be careful of charity and kindness, lest you do more harm with open hands than with a clenched fist.
And then the light side option.
Why did you do such a thing? Giving into your feelings over such a small matter. They would be better served elsewhere. The smallest push, the smallest touch, sends echoes throughout life. These acts of cruelty may have more severe repercussions than you know or can see. Cruelty leads to suffering, and when one suffers, it is the way of life to spread suffering. The suffering within builds until its sound is all one hears. And when a kindness is offered, it is punished, and a greater darkness is served. From one act can come tremendous power when the echo has traveled as far as it can. Send a great echo, and power will come to you. The day shall come when you can test your strength, I promise you.
And I'll get more into the smaller details in smaller little separate videos. But essentially, there can be knots on the web of power, there can be echoes sent through the web of power. That's what's largely responsible for certain feelings that you get. It's all just to do with this giant web of power. And so to conclude real quick, essentially, everyone is a star in the Force. And how powerful you are depends on how many threads, how many living things you bind together in this one whole tapestry that is the Force web. This aspect of the Force is sometimes called the anima, and is the vital heat that Aristotle spoke of. The animating principle, it gives life but not thought. and is the energy source for most Force abilities, which extends to like Force augmentation. So for example, in the original trilogy, everyone's really slow. And one of the in-universe explanations for that is because, yeah, the Force, the energy source, has been sucked out of the universe. Killing those beings strong in the Force sucks out the fire of life from the universe and makes the Force weaker. And eventually what happens in Revenge of the Sith is they kill all the Jedi and they kill the Force. The living Force actually is pretty much completely dead, as represented by the death of the daughter on Mortis.
This is all spiritual, this is all metaphor, this is all symbolic in some way.
There is no light. The evil has been unleashed, and the dark side shall consume her.
The fire has gone out, the light side is dead. I know you're probably thinking like, oh well, if the living Force is life and the living Force is dead, then how is anyone alive in the original trilogy? And you know, there's still a basic spark of life left in the universe. It hasn't gone that far yet. That's the threat in the original trilogy though, should Luke fail to defeat Palpatine, is that all life in the universe will literally just die because there's too much death. And that's what the dark side is, death. So whilst there is a little bit of fire left, tiny bit, basic spark of life, it's becoming more and more corrupted over time, and it is under immediate threat of completely going out. And I'll do another video on that because that is interesting. Because all life in the original trilogy was under immediate threat of extinction. Like the light was entirely about to go. There was only a tiny spark left. And what's interesting about that is that actually is represented by Luke Skywalker, because Anakin is the embodiment of the Force. So the last light left in him is the last light left in the universe, and I'll get more into that, as I say, in a future video. Also going to do another video on what happens to the power of the web after these Jedi die. The constant symbiosis there, the passing of knowledge and power, all stuff like that. I'm going to get into all of that soon. But that's the Living Force web, and that's how the Living Force web works. Let me know if you have any questions, if you need anything clarifying in the comments, or you want me to make a new video branching off of anything mentioned in this video, branching off of any of the topics in this, or going into just a completely brand new topic. If you've got any suggestions, just leave them in the comments and I'll get around to it. Go ahead and share the video, spread the news so people actually know how the Force works in Star Wars, and so people can actually get a good idea for how to actually properly power scale in Star Wars, because everyone seems to be taking the complete wrong approach to it, and looking at the Force mechanics, Force functions like this is how it should be done.